Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. A few weeks ago I asked if people would be interested in seeing my makeup palette collections, and it was a resounding yes. So I'm going to include every palette that I own that is predominantly 8-pan and higher. In some cases there's a few less, but I kind of felt like they went with the overall arching theme of this, and they're not really drugstore. So without further ado, let's get into this because this is going to take a while. I'm going to start with the ones that I have the most of and work my way down into like the single brand palettes. I'll pretty much be talking a little bit about each palette, perhaps where I got it, when, why, and then we'll just go from there. These are pre-made palettes. These are nothing like a MAC or a Makeup Geek or a Zed palette that would have been put together by myself. These are strictly pre-made palettes. Also, if you are interested in the makeup look that is on my face, I did do it as a guest post for my friend Zoe because she's going on vacation and she needed some filler posts. So I will link her blog down below and you can see all the details about what's on my face. Alright, so to start it off, hands down the brand that I have the most of is Too Faced because they are my absolute favorite high-end brand. I have the original chocolate bar palette. This is in the original thicker packaging, which actually makes it really cumbersome to use. I'm really not a fan of the larger packaging, so I'm glad that they've reshaped them to be the smaller one. I do find because it's thicker, I reach for it less, but this is what made me fall in love with the brand. The shades are absolutely beautiful. The scent is to die for. I mean, it makes me really happy to open a palette and love the scent. Of course, when you have one Too Faced chocolate bar palette, you can't stop there. You have to collect the entire collection. So this one is the Semi-Sweet Chocolate Bar Palette, which is hands down my favorite one. The colors in this speak a lot more to me because they tend to be more orange, warmy toned. They tend to be more warm toned, and I don't know, color's a personal thing, but for me this just really works more in my favor. I even like this strange shade here called Pink Sugar. A lot of people don't like it. It doesn't look like anything on the finger. It's primarily glitter suspended in some kind of clear base. It's fun to work with, but it looks really dirty over time. I really love this, and hands down favorite shade is Peanut Butter, which you'll see again soon. And of course, this past December, I got the Too Faced Chocolate Bonbons palette. I, unlike a lot of people, was never really in love with this pink heart packaging thing. I don't really get it, but I buy it anyway because I love it. So this palette, as everyone has seen, comes with the heart-shaped pans. It's very pink toned. There's a lot of, well, pink in it. I do reach for this palette when I want more of a cool tone look and I want to use a chocolate bar, primarily because of this shade right here, which is Cafe au lait. And then Molasses Chip, although not cool toned, is such a gorgeous shade. Anyway, this is a fun one to work with, even if you don't really reach for the pink colors. Alright, the next Too Faced palette that I have is another one in the tin packaging, and that is the recently released Sweet Peach palette. The much sought after Sweet Peach palette, I might add. I know this is totally gone right now, and it was incredibly hard to get your hands on because certain Sephoras were sent like 1 or 2. But the CEO or co-CEO of Too Faced has actually said that they are they're not just trying, they're getting this re-released. They've said that those in the US will be able to get this in time for Christmas, but they're trying to get the rest of the world several months later. Hopefully it's coming your way if you really want it. I of course love it because it's very warm toned. There's been a lot of complaints that there's not enough peach shades in here, and that kind of makes me laugh because if they added more peach shades in here, people wouldn't wear it. Like, this is enough right here to be enough peach tones. You need more variety in a palette. I really don't see that many women or men wearing bright pink or bright peach eyeshadows, so I really don't get what that complaint is all about. I think the palette is perfect. I think it has enough variety for everyone, and I love the shades that they've included. It does smell like fake peach scent, but that doesn't bother me. I know people have said that it doesn't smell like real peaches. Well, guess what guys? It's not real peach. Anyway, I really love this palette and I'm really hopeful that people are going to be able to get their hands on it in several more months' time. Although that seems like so far away. Anyway, I do love this one. Another palette that is in Too Faced collection is the Love palette. And I received this recently at a blogger swap because the person who had brought it in said it was too shimmery. I have to agree, this palette is way too shimmery. There's just not enough finish variety in these shades to make a really cohesive look, but I'm a Too Faced addict, so I wanted it regardless. Moving on to their smaller palettes, I have the Sugar Pop palette that got released, I believe it was last summer, and it's brights, which really intrigued me because Too Faced doesn't really tend to put out super bright palettes. They're all kind of like more neutral with a pop of color. This one has a ton of bright, so I was really interested in it. I do find that the colors are actually better in quality than this brown shade down here. I have never encountered a Too Faced brown with terrible pigmentation, but this, what's this one called? Malted Milk Ball. This one's terrible, and I don't even understand because the rest of their palettes have fantastic brown shades in it, so something's wrong with the formula of this guy. Anyway, overall, I do really love the shades in this palette, and they play very well together. Plus, I love how compact these 9-pans are. They're just so handy. Of course, my very favorite 9-pan palette is the Peanut Butter and Jelly palette, but I'm pretty sure you all saw that one coming. They stole the shade, it's their own brand. They replicated the peanut butter shade into this palette and then just blew it up. So the peanut butter shade is the one down here, and then they just kind of obviously took the theme of peanut butter and jelly and went with it. It doesn't smell exactly like the chocolate bar palettes. I always say it smells sweet with a bit of a nutty edge. I don't smell peanut butter, but I don't really smell chocolate either. Either way, I think hands down, this is probably my favorite palette ever. At least it's definitely my favorite palette of the year. I love this one. Oh, and it's now permanent. It's now permanent at Ulta, guys. So even if you can't get your hands on it because you don't live in the US, if you're going traveling anytime soon or in the next year, maybe 2 years, you can get your hands on this guy. One I picked up last year that kind of surprised me was the Stardust palette by Vegas Nay. And I'm not even sure what drove me to pick this up. I don't know who Vegas Nay is at all. I only found out when I was purchasing the palette that she's an Instagrammer that helped create the shades. So I don't really know what drove me to get it aside from my love for the brand. But the shades in here just work together. I mean, they're so seamless with each other that it's almost like magic when you put them on your eyes. I especially love Millennial, Girls Night, Showgirl, and Jackpot. Like this area right here makes a gorgeous eyeshadow look. And then if I want to deepen up things or make them, you know, more colorful, there is that option there. I think it's weird that there's no mirror, but this was such a great random palette that came out. Really love it. Also an Ulta exclusive, I think. All right, the next one was gifted to me by a friend who just doesn't use bronzer enough, and this is the Little Black Book of Bronzers. And this contains, I believe, every single one of Too Faced bronzers. So it's great for if you don't know how to make up your mind on which one to purchase, make up your mind. Yep, I use my own blog name in a sentence. I will say though that because this isn't a palette, I don't tend to reach for as much as my individual bronzers, which is a little bit of a shame considering how much I actually enjoy the formula. Regardless, this is very handy for people who want to figure out what shade works best for them. So I love it, and the shades do, the ones that are supposed to smell like chocolate do smell like chocolate. So you got milk chocolate, chocolate soleil, and then dark chocolate. All right, so we talked about bronzer, let's move on to blush. I have the Love Flush Blush Palette, and this contains all 6 of their Love Flush blushes. Again, really handy. I like that they've put out a relatively compact version with every single shadow. It's easy to reach for, it's compact. The only thing I'm not super keen on is how long this thing is. I think they could have cut it in half and then just doubled the size and it would have made a little bit more sense. One of my blogging friends, I think it was Jane, called this a baton, and it still makes me laugh to this day because it seriously is like you could hit somebody with it. It's that big, but it is super, super slim. All right, the next 2 palettes, still from Too Faced, are from their holiday collections. And I picked up the 2013 and the 2014. So this was the 2013 palette called A Few of My Favorite Things. And this was one of the items that really made me kind of fall in love with the brand. I still can't remember to this day if I bought the chocolate bar first or if I bought this palette first. Anyway, this was a great assortment of shades. I remember bringing this on vacation with me and just being able to come up with something new every single day. I took it to Prague. And then there's 2 bronzers and then 2 blushes. I thought this was fantastic, and it came in a sleeve that fit it perfectly. I love this. I really love this, and I still reach for this. This isn't even a palette that's like gotten lost at the back of my collection. I still reach for this, so I think that really speaks to the quality of it. And then I picked up the 2014 version, which is Everything Nice. Now this came a little bit thicker because they actually included some brushes in it, which I wasn't so keen on. This has the same sort of layout with 20 eyeshadows, and then, oh, this one's a highlighter, 2 blushes up here, and then a bronzer. And then I think the brushes were in here, which kind of makes it a little bit thicker. Again, I love the shades that they chose for this one, and they were varied enough from the 2013 version that I felt justified in buying it. That being said, there was something really weird with the packaging of this one, and my palette did not fit in the pouch that it came with, so that was kind of weird. I didn't end up buying the 2015 version just because I felt it was too similar to both of these palettes combined. But I'm already curious. It's only May, and I'm already curious about what they're going to be releasing for 2016. So as you can tell, I'm a huge Too Faced fan because I have so many palettes and I love the quality of them. All right, so the next brand is Urban Decay, and they're kind of what started off my palette obsession. I was gifted the original Urban Decay Naked palette by my friend Dorothy when she brought this up to Canada from the US when it wasn't yet available here. And I think this is the only palette that I've ever hit pan on, which I recently discussed in my hit pan video. I love this palette so intensely, and it just made me want to collect more and more because the options of reaching for a palette were so much better than reaching for single shadows, and they were strewn all over my room, so it became problematic. So yeah, this is the original and what started it all. And I still reach for this palette. This is my palette of choice when I want to wear makeup like for a job interview and stuff like that. This is definitely what I reach for. Of course, like I said with the Too Faced palette, if you're gonna buy one, you're gonna buy them all. So I picked up the Naked 2 palette when I was on vacation in Florida. And I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of this. I wasn't a big fan when they moved to the tin packaging. I preferred the weird velvet thing, although I know a lot of people weren't keen on it. And there's something about this one that they're loose in here. Like the shadows, yeah, there we go. They just pop out. So I've got 2 floating shadows, and I've glued them in twice now, and they just won't stay down. This palette just didn't really work for me because every time I wore any of the shadows in this section, they all looked the same. It all looked muddy. It all looked like I applied the same shadow. So I wasn't really keen on this palette at all. And why do I still own it? Because I'm a hoarder. So of course, got to keep it in the family, right? I picked up the Naked 3 palette, and this was infinitely better than the Naked 2. Although, again, very pink, and I don't know why I buy pink shades, but I fell into the hype of it and I got it on launch day. And it was a good palette for me. I remember not this past January, I don't even know why I remember this, not this past January, but the January before, this was about the only palette I reached for just because it felt super simple. So I think in the sense that if you need something that's really easy to work with, has a few shimmery colors, but can look very subtle and clean on your face, the Naked 3 is a good option. The next one I bought used from a friend because she just didn't use it enough, and that is the Electric palette. This is right up my alley. This is stuff that I love and know and want to wear on my face all the time. Except I always forget to reach for this palette, so what is wrong with me? These are so much fun to play with. They are pigments, so technically some of these you're not supposed to use on your eyes. Let's get real, guys. This is in an eyeshadow pan, you're gonna use it on your eyes. So I really do love the shades, and whenever I come up with a look using it, I'm just reminded of how much I love this palette. So I should probably use it more. All right, so my favorite palette by Urban Decay has to be their Vice 3 palette. There's something about the layout of this palette that really speaks to me, and it just makes for really cohesive looks. I really like how they're organized because I think they make sense. Unlike, I might add, the Vice 4 that released this past holiday season. I hated that sucker. I don't even have it anymore because I gave it away to a friend who was willing to try it out. So that's not in this collection because I don't have it. But this Vice 3 was beautiful, and my mom picked it up for me, which is really nice. and it just really works together cohesively. I love the shades, and I really don't think that they're ever going to beat the Vice 3 for me in terms of colors. All right, the very last Urban Decay palette that I have is the Urban Spectrum palette, which also came out this past holiday season. Oh God. You know, I was terrified that I was going to drop a palette while doing this, and yep, sure enough. Well, Urban Decay, you take the cake, because I just dropped this Urban Spectrum palette from, I don't know, 3 feet up, and none of it broke. They're all still very much intact in here, so that's really impressive. All right, so the Urban Spectrum had a lot of shades in here that were also included in the 15th anniversary palette, which I didn't pick up back in the day, and I really wanted the shades. I think Omen was one of them that particularly spoke to me. Now, this is a beautiful palette, but it's also a little bit weird. There are no mattes in this palette, so you really need to incorporate it with something that has mattes and blending shades and stuff like that, because this is really hard to work with just on its own. I mean, it's doable, but it's a lot of shimmer on your eyelid. Anyway, I really love the shades in this one, and it's a lot of fun to play with. Also, now that my packaging has fallen apart, it comes with this case that the eyeshadows then slide into, and the mirrored top goes on top. This is currently still available. I know they're still selling it on Urban Decay's website, so you can still pick this up. The next brand I have to talk about is Sleek, and I have a lot of their palettes. When I was first getting into having more and more palettes, this is one of the brands that I really reached for because they're really inexpensive, especially for the quality. The quality is fantastic. All right, so let's run through these. One of the things that kind of annoys me though about the iDivine packaging for Sleek is that they don't have labels on the front. There's no distinguishing factors about what these palettes are. So I kind of wrote on top, and I think it looks terrible now. Anyway, let's run through them. This one is the Sunset palette, which, yep, nice and warm and orange and red. I really, really love this palette. The next one is the Matte Brights palette, and this is, again, a lot of fun to use. I love that these shades are matte. They don't swatch particularly well. In fact, they look pretty damn shitty in swatches, but I use these with my regular NYX eyeshadow base in Milk, and they come out perfectly fine. So don't always trust the swatch, because sometimes stuff applies completely different on the eyelid. This was a great base palette for me when I didn't have a whole lot of like range of shades, especially in a matte formula. I definitely didn't have a lot of color in matte. So I really love this one and still reach for it. Next up is the Acid palette, and it's a whole, well, I was gonna say there's a lot of neon in this palette, but it's really only these 4 shades right here that are the neon colors. It is really bright though, and I do have to say that the neons are the worst colors in this palette. I don't know what it is with neons. I find that they're really hard to get the formula right, or if even anyone's ever gotten it right. It's just a really difficult pigment, it seems like. You can pack it on, but you have to be careful because sometimes the layers will lift a little bit. But still, like, I still use it. All right, and the one that started all for Sleek is the original palette. And you can kind of see why they started getting known for these 12 pan palettes, because the colors are just gorgeous. I mean, again, these are all shimmery, so you really do, well, except for the black. The black is matte. You really do need some blending colors to make this work, but these are great palettes. The next one I have is the Matte Darks. Actually, they are called the Ultra Mattes. I just tend to prefer them as the Matte Darks. These are great as an addition to another palette. These really help for me to deepen up the outer crease area, and because they're so different in colors, that really helps, because I don't want to be doing like a green look and then use a brown to darken up the outer crease. I want to use something like a dark green. So this is something great to reach for, especially if you're doing colored looks and need something to deepen up that outer area. And the last one I got from Sleek is the Au Naturel palette, which is, I mean, it's your basic neutral palette. Which is funny because none of the other ones really scream neutral to me, but this one is like the one. Unlike the other ones, this one does have more of a range of finishes. There are mostly matte shades with a few shimmers thrown in. All right, next up is Kat Von D. And I only really recently started delving into Kat Von D products. And that was all spurred on by Mi Vida Loca Remix palette. I mean, is there anybody out there that didn't fall in love with the look of this palette? We all pull this out and we all coo over it. I think this is one of the best vibrant palettes you can get your hand on. There are neutrals in the middle to help you out, and then there are a rainbow of variety shades for you to choose from. And they're not just shimmery. They're matte, they're satin, and there's some sheen in there too, which I think this makes this great. The only thing that I'm not super keen on is the fact that this is so big, and the pull-out method for this is really not conducive with doing a quick makeup look. So that kind of stinks, and I don't find myself reaching for it nearly as much, but when I do, the looks are beautiful. The other large Kat Von D palette that I have is one of the holiday releases, and this is the Star-Studded Eyeshadow Book. And a beauty blogging friend of mine just didn't want it, so passed it on to me. And I haven't used it a ton, but it's still gorgeous. I always reach for the orange shades, but these ones are gorgeous. And the variety in here is enough to keep people happy. I really do need to do more with this because it is such a fun palette. Although, again, not available anymore. The next one is the Kat Von D Shade and Light Eye Palette. And I was gifted this by a former coworker of mine who found that she was reacting to the eyeshadows. She felt like she was allergic to it, which I have actually heard about like Kat Von D palettes before, so it didn't really surprise me. However, it worked out for me. This is a fully matte palette that is grouped into warm, cool, and then neutral, like sections. Again, like any matte palette, this really helps flesh out any shimmery palette or anything like that. You can also make beautiful, beautiful looks just using these eyeshadows. And unfortunately, it's not something I tend to reach for because it's matte, but man guys, if you use all matte shadows on the eye, it's really a gorgeous look. It can be a little bit boring to put together because it doesn't seem as flashy as something shimmery, but the shades in here just make for stunning makeup looks. All right, this last little guy is not an 8-pan, but I had to include it because it's the only Kat Von D stuff I have. And this is the Shade and Light Eye Contour Quad in the shade Rust. And it's just like a little bit of an add-on to the Shade and Light Eye palette because the layout is pretty much the same. This is pretty similar to the Warmed section, and I know people do compare them, this section up here. I do agree. I think they're pretty similar, but they are not identical, so you can get a little bit different looks using both of them. All right, the next brand is Tarte, and I have 3 items by them. The first one I ever got was the Off the Cuff Blush Palette. And I am so, so happy that I picked this up back in the day because to this day, this is the only blush palette that has ever included their bronzer. I've gone traveling with this because it's so handy. Unfortunately, the names are not printed on the packaging, which drives me crazy. But I love the coral. I think this is called Dollhouse. Turns out to be quite attractive on me, even though I really don't like reaching for pink shades. I love the bronzer too, so this is just a great option. Tarte continues to put out blush palettes, although not with a bronzer. So if you ever see them, they are well worth the value because I find the quality's on par with the singles, and yet these are so much cheaper. The next one I have is the Rainforest After Dark palette. And this is still on sale on their website, and I'm pretty sure on Sephora too, so I don't think it's sold that well. I love these disc formats though, because these are fantastic as an all-in-one face palette. You've got your highlighter, you've got your bronzer, you got your blush in the middle, and then 6 eyeshadows to round it all out. And I will forever regret not getting the Tarte for Aqua Lilies collection. That disc, I've looked for it on eBay and I almost want to spend ridiculous amounts of money on it because it's so gorgeous, but I haven't yet. So for now I have the Rainforest After Dark disc. And more recently, Tarte came out with the Rainforest of the Sea collection. Unlike the Rainforest After Dark collection, it doesn't have a blush in the middle. It just has 8 eyeshadows that are, I think they're all shimmery. I actually am in the midst of testing this one out and I haven't posted a review of it yet on my blog, but that is coming soon. The colors are gorgeous, but it's worth noting that these are not the same size. Like one's a little bit smaller. I still prefer the option with the blush in the middle, but that's just me. The next brand I have is Becca, and 2 of these products are actually so new to me that I haven't even used them yet. Starting right off, I have the Becca and Jaclyn Hill palette. I was gonna say, is this even called Champagne Glow? It's the Champagne Collection Face Palette. And I'm sure everyone's seen this already at this point. I haven't even stuck my fingers in it yet because I haven't photographed it yet. And as a blogger, you're not allowed to touch anything until you photograph it. So, I mean, everyone's seen this at this point, but it comes with Champagne Pop, Prosecco Pop, Rosé Spritz, and then this guy is Amaretto, and this is Pamplemousse, which I've heard so many people pronounce in the most interesting of manners, but it's grapefruit in French. There you go. And of course I wanted to pick up the eyeshadow palette, so I got that as well. So 5 shadows in there. Haven't swatched them yet, haven't even touched them yet, but I'll be putting together looks with those. And then my other palette from Becca is the Ombre Rouge palette. And this is a collection of 5 matte shades that are just slightly more rosy / red tone. I don't feel they're as red as I kind of expected them to be, but they do wear very beautifully on the eyes. The next brand is Laura Mercier, and I kind of picked up the 2013 Artist Palette on a whim. I'd never tried Laura Mercier before, but there was something about the shades in this palette that I just really loved. It is a neutral row on top and then a pinky purple toned row on the bottom. This was limited edition and I have the older packaging, but thankfully they actually released this as a permanent product, which I think is fantastic because Laura Mercier's single eyeshadows are super expensive and they don't even have like all of these shades in their regular lineup. I really think there's only like 6 eyeshadows, which isn't a ton. So when they came out with this palette, I snapped it right up because that was a great deal. And I've used this consistently over the years and still love it to this day. Then the following year, for I think it was 2014, I wanted to pick up the next holiday palette. And this one is the Artist's Palette for Eyes and Cheeks. Now this one turned out to be a little less exciting than the previous one. You ended up with this rose gold shimmer, like it's like a brick right in the middle that I really just don't reach for very much. But the eyeshadow quality is still on par with the 2013 palette. I think it's buttery, soft, probably one of the easiest eyeshadows I've ever had the pleasure of working with. It's just the colors in this palette just didn't really work out as much for me. But I would still absolutely buy any Laura Mercier palette that comes out in the future. They're just really hard to get a hold of in Canada. All right, a more recent love is Lorac, and I picked up both of these palettes just over this past holiday season when I was in the US because you can't get Lorac in Canada. No, I didn't pick them up. One of them was sent to me by Sarah, a very good friend of mine. Okay, so here's what happened. I picked up the Lorac Mega Pro 2 when I was in the US under explicit instructions not to pick up the next palette I'm going to talk about because my friend was going to be buying it for me. I missed out like a chump on the Mega Pro 1, and I have had so much regret about losing that palette that I don't think I'm ever going to forget it. And I know I'm not the only one. I know there's plenty of people out there that still regret missing out on that palette. I don't know why it was such a limited release. Anyway, Mega Pro 2 was out much longer, and I was so thankful that I was in the US that I picked it up as soon as I freaking saw it. There's a ton of shadows in here. I love that there's 2 rows of mattes and then 2 rows of shimmers, and the possibilities are endless. I will say though that Lorac eyeshadows are fairly powdery. They can produce a lot of kick up, so you might get some fallout when you apply them. They wear just fine though, so I don't really see the problem with powdery products. I know some people don't love them, but for me they work out just fine. You just have to be a little bit careful when you apply them the first time. So the palette I was told not to buy because my friend was going to be picking it up is the Lorac Unzipped Gold palette. Now I never owned the original Unzipped because I just didn't care about the pink, but this, these colors were just gorgeous. They are primarily warm toned. There's not a whole lot of difference I feel between these 2 shades, like if you look at them vertically, but I am absolutely living for this Unleashed color. It looks like molten lava mixed with gold. It's just, oh, it's so beautiful. I just wish you could get Lorac more consistently in Canada, or, you know, at all. All right, the next 2 are items that you can't get anymore in Canada either because along with Target, they went. So they are the Sonia Kashuk 12 pan palettes. And the first one I have is the Ion Neutrals 2 palette. All matte, very easy to use, great for like helping out with any kind of overly shimmery, overly colorful palette that you have. Excellent quality. And the one that I was gifted because a friend just didn't want to use it and I was so excited to get my hands on is the Jewel of an Eye palette. I think this was limited edition, and I just didn't travel to the US whenever it was out, and I kind of missed out on it, and I was so regretful. And then a friend kind of stuck it in a swap, and I was like, oh heck yes, I want that one. So I am so happy to have the Jewel of an Eye palette. The next brand I have is Smashbox, and I have an absolutely enormous one here, and this is the On the Rocks palette. That was a holiday release. I can't remember, it must have been 2 years ago now. I think it was 2 years ago. And like with the Lorac palette, my friend also sent me this. And this, I'd never used Smashbox shadows before, so I was curious to try them out. And there was so many color options in here. This is really good for somebody who wants to play with color but needs something that's a bit, they're jewel tone but they're more toned down. So you can mix them with the neutrals and play with the colors while still building a cohesive look, because the shades all really kind of blend in together well. They don't like mush together and become nothingness, but they retain their colors, but they just work really well together. And then the next Smashbox palette that I tried was the Double Exposure palette. And this one really blew me away. I mean, the On the Rocks palette was good, but they don't compare anywhere near to the shades in this palette. I don't know if the formula is different. I really don't know enough about Smashbox's eyeshadow formula, but these are fantastic to work with. The colors in this palette are kind of like warm toned on this side and then cooler toned on this side. And I think that, actually, and I just noticed they're balanced out by a black and a silver. So that's kind of smart. You can do a lot of things with this palette, and it's really easy to work with. So well done, Smashbox. Okay, we're down to the single palettes now. The first one I have is a recent purchase that I got at IMATS New York, and this is the Violet Voss Holy Grail palette. Walking into IMATS, I didn't know a single thing about Violet Voss's eyeshadows. I just knew that they made glitter, and that was it. And my friends kind of convinced me to pick up this palette, and you know, peer pressure always works. But oh man, I am so glad I got this palette. I have read some negative reviews on it, and I'm a little bit, I don't get it. These are all really pigmented. I have not struggled with application on any of these shades, and the colors are gorgeous. Like again, with the reds, I like this whole area right here, but this shade down here, Toffee, holy smokes, that is just gorgeous. So stuff like these shades are right up my alley. All right, the next one came from a swap again because somebody just wasn't using it, and that is the BH Cosmetics Galaxy Chic palette. So the Galaxy Chic palette comes with 18 baked eyeshadows that are shaped like planets. They do work wet or dry. I tend to use them dry just because that's faster and quicker. They are mostly shimmery though, so you will need an extra palette to work with them, but they're freaking gorgeous shades, and I really think this palette's only like 12 bucks. All right, the next one I included, even though it's a 4-pan, because the palette is quite sizable, and that's the Anastasia Glow Kit in the shade Gleam. This is a highlight palette that sadly lacks a mirror. Given the price tag, it should have had a mirror. There are 4 beautiful highlighters in here, and this one right here is actually a really interesting / bizarre duochrome. It looks really, I mean, it looks a little bit intimidating for a highlight shade in the pan, but it actually goes on really subtly. I have worn all of these shades as a highlighter on my skin tone, and it seems to work out just fine. So I really like this palette. All right, the next one is a favorite of mine when I want to play with color, and that is the Viseart 08 Editorial Brights palette. And this too has suffered a fall in the past. Actually, I've kind of broken my case a little bit. These are very expensive eyeshadows, but I think they are well worth the money. Ugh. I mean, don't you just want to stare at it? It's so, so beautiful, and they apply so well. I've been asked this before, but even with a high quality palette like this, I will still use NYX's eyeshadow pencil in Milk as a base because I want to make sure that the colors are as vibrant as I can get them. If you're looking for a rainbow palette, you really don't need to look any further than this if you can afford the price tag. This next one was another IMATS New York purchase, and that is my very first Mehron palette. This is the Fire palette. It also does say pressed powder pigments, so I'm guessing it's not safe for your eyes, but they go on my eyes anyway. This is a very vibrant neon palette. It's not as neon as the Acid Brights palette though by Sleek. The pans are huge, and they're a little bit difficult to work with. Oddly, the colors that work the best are this neon pink shade and then the orange one. I really struggled with like shades around here because they're quite, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not just that they're powdery, but it's also like the pigment just kind of doesn't adhere to itself. It's like they're missing some sort of base to bind it together. Anyway, the palette is beautiful and I have used it twice now and produced decent enough looks. There are some areas on my lids though that just didn't stick together too well and it got a little bit patchy, so I'm a little bit iffy on this one. The very last palette I have is the Balm's Meet Matte Nude, and this was a gift from my aunt, which really surprised me because she was able to pick out an eyeshadow palette that I didn't own. She went on, I think it was Amazon or something like that, and just looked up reviews, so I thought that was really sweet. And also incredibly successful. I mean, how do you pick up a palette for an eyeshadow junkie and get something that they don't have? Really impressive. So this is a 9-pan all matte eyeshadow palette that very cutely uses names like Matte Johnson, Matte Garcia, Matte Malloy to indicate that the shades are matte. As this is the only palette that I've ever used by the Balm, I have to say that the quality is fantastic. I had no issues using this palette and yeah, fairly impressed. Now I just need to get more. All right, that was all of my eyeshadow palettes. That was a lot more talking than I thought was going to happen. I hope you enjoyed seeing everything that I own. This didn't include any quads or 6 pans that weren't already branded in here, so I might do a video on that later, but we'll see how this one goes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!